Welcome to Rolling Out's Meet the Author. I'm your host, Tigner Rand. Meet the Author is a part of Rolling Out's book club series where I talk with authors about their new book projects and, of course, what inspires them to write. Joining me today in Meet the Author is Kaia Alderson, who is an historical women's fiction author who has a passion for discovering hidden gems in Black women's history. Her debut novel is entitled Sisters in Arms. Alderson has also created novels based upon factual events that occurred during World War II that uncovered hidden figures. In addition to writing this novel, Kaia has also written romantic comedies, historical romance works, as well as comic short stories. But today we're going to focus on this historical debut novel, Sisters in Arms, which focuses on the conflict of World War II, the conflicts that Blacks encountered during the war, but more specifically, conflicts that Black women encountered when they enlisted into the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. The story follows two young Black women, Grace Steele and Eliza Jones, who both joined the Army for different reasons, but became friends on a roller coaster journey while serving in the Army's part of the 6888 Battalion, which happens to be a real battalion, the Central Postal Direct Battalion. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome to Meet the Author, Kaia Alderson. Welcome today. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
All is well. I'm excited that you're here to join us to talk about this novel. And I found it most intriguing because you based it on a lot of factual things that happened during World War II, but you put your own little twist to it with a plot, which I thought was pretty interesting. And it was compelling, and it even made you think that it was real all the way through from beginning to end. So what really inspired you to write Sisters in Arms?
It all started with a picture that floated down my Twitter feed a few years ago.
Oh, wow.
Where it made me pause because I've
cool
always
picture.
been a bit
Put
of
that
a World
picture
War
back
II.
up again. Put it back up again.
Put it back up. Yep. Yep. This is the 6888. They're marching through the plaza where Joan of Arc was burned at the stake in Rouen, France in 1945.
That's awesome. That's a great, that's a very good picture.
Yeah, well, I've always been a World War II geek, and I knew about the Women's Army Corps, and I, intellectually knew women had served, but I'd never seen a picture until I saw that, and that was just like, whoa.
Right.
So I immediately looked up to see who are these Black women in Europe, and it looks like World War II, and then I immediately said I have to write a story about them. I wanted to do Soldier Girl's last night in town before she shifts out to war and leaves the guy behind. So Sisters in Arms more from that first idea.
Okay. Now, it's a little deeper than that. This was a story that kind of started 30 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, where it all started from a project in middle school. You had to do research and write a paper on women or people who are family members who were part of World War II. So how did that start?
The assignment was to speak to the oldest person in our family who and ask them about their experience during the war. So I spoke to my Aunt Carmen, and when I knew her, I knew that she'd been a teacher, but when I asked her, she said she had been a civilian clerk for the Army during the war. And I was just like, whoa, they let women do that, or Black women do that? And then she laughed and she said the only reason she got the job is because her commanding officer found it amusing that she was a colored girl with a college degree. So that particular line always stuck with me. So when I was being honest, I was like, okay, we're going to show what the colored girl with the college degree can do.
So, and that last part you just stated is kind of the whole underlying tone of the book, that each sister who enlisted in the Army, it was almost like they had a mission to be able to prove, like we've always heard our ancestors say, that you had to go above and beyond the call of duty to prove, quote unquote, yourself to be in the white man's army, or to be a teacher, or to be a doctor, or whatever the profession was during that time. So and that's what I got kind of picked up throughout the book.
Yes. Basically it almost feels like every scene, whenever they hit a challenge, it's like, all right, give them hell, you know, they're not used to us doing anything that isn't cleaning up after them. So yeah, or even the fact that we have a Black doctor in the book, because in other stories I've gotten pushback where there was disbelief that there were Black doctors in early 20th
Wow.
century. So I found a real life one who was there, who was attached to the unit, and he's in the book too.
Pause, pause, pause. Wait a minute. You're telling me that when you have submitted various manuscripts or writings that the editors questioned the fact that there were Black doctors during that
I've
time?
I've had when I would submit for critiques and things, everyone always assumed my doctors were white, and I'm like, no, they're Black. Or that this story wouldn't sell unless I changed the love interest to a white man,
Uh-uh.
and it sold with the Black man. Yeah.
Wow. Out of all the things that we've seen in history, a lot of they've made movies about over the years of what it from the discovery of penicillin
Mm-hmm.
to open heart surgery, but yet we
Mm-hmm.
still have to fight this ongoing battle to prove ourselves that yes, there were people
Mm-hmm.
that were making waves in history as doctors.
Yes.
That's
Actually,
crazy.
mhm, one of the very minor characters in the book, Vera G. Campbell, she was
Yes.
actually one of two Black female podiatrists in New York City in the 40s. And she went and enlisted because she figured that, okay, they're going to need my services because I'm a foot doctor and all that marching. And they had her doing administrative work, as far as I
So
could tell.
that's correct. And I
Mhm.
remember that character. So that actually the character in the book was based upon a actual person who was a podiatrist who
Mhm.
enlisted in the women's army.
Yes, she was in the first 40 in that first officer class.
Wow.
Mhm.
And they now, and based upon your research, couldn't find any use of her profession or from her degree.
Mhm. And because of the double segregation by race and by gender, the Black women got some really good foot care where everyone else might not have, been shorter. Yep.
That's a good point. They probably did. They probably did if we really stop and think about it. Because one thing
Mhm.
we do know that our people had a tendency to help one another. So if no one else
Mhm.
got the service, the
Mhm.
sisters in the WAC got covered
Yep.
in that battalion.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
So, as a historical writer,
Mhm.
what do you look for during your research? What makes a good content for a novel, and especially like Sisters in Arms?
Mhm. Um, just interesting tidbits that you normally wouldn't jump out at you. I'm trying to think of a good one. Like while I was writing the book, and then all of these instances show up where, white people are calling the police on Black people for doing normal things. Well, guess what? That happened back then too. So that shows up in the book where you have Black women officers in uniform, and
Oh yeah,
somebody took offense to it and thought they were going to
yes,
call the
on the
military
train, the
police
train
on them.
ride.
Yeah. So, that was something I knew had to go in there. And yes, there were Black female military personnel and officers who were beaten up because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and people took offense to that. That shows up in the book. So like just little things just to get a taste of real life, but also I'm a popular music junkie. You get that from the book. So just being able to pop in different things, like if I probably shouldn't tell this, but there's like a cameo by a couple famous jazz people of the era, named and not named. I'm waiting for somebody to find
Yes, you
one
picked that
unnamed
up
one and figure
also.
out who
Yeah,
it is.
yeah,
So, things like that make it fun. I've had people, and it's interesting what people find, because everybody who said, oh, I picked up on this, I picked up on that. Everybody's found something different. So, like Thurgood Marshall is a neighbor because he was in Harlem at the time, doing his civil rights work, things like that. So that's what I did to try to keep it fun and
you
keep it
did.
balanced with with the hard parts of living back then, as well as, just everyday life. We weren't always downtrodden or, had somebody's boot on our necks. We lived life.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So one thing that really caught my eye is the opening chapter of the book, and where you really kind of delve in with one of the main characters of the book, and that was Grace. I like that, was that part of, having her to try out for Juilliard, was that kind of part of the love of music, or was that something that you had found through some of your research, or how did you develop that character?
Because she basically told me she was a concert pianist, because initially she was the colored girl with the college degree working in the office. I have a whole about 20,000 words in the delete file about her working in the office and things like that. And then I was just like, well, what does Grace really want? What is her ultimate goal? And she was like, to play the piano. And I was like, oh, I don't know anything about that. So I had to go, I actually found a book that was on the history of Juilliard, and I read it all the way up until the 1940s to write that one scene.
Okay.
But
now, I will say this, not to give a lot away, I really did like the development characteristics of Grace. The one thing that I think I understood, but I also wished that she would have expounded more upon her the ability to play, when she did later on, but it's like still use it, but I get it. A lot of people have these talents and things that they love, and all of a sudden they'll put it in the closet. I'm guilty. I've done it myself. But I just, for some reason, I was just like, Grace, okay, play the piano, Grace. She's fingering all the time. She's this, but she never wanted to. Yeah, she never wanted to play the piano. And I found that quite interesting, that was kind of going throughout the entire book.
Well, one arc of both Grace and Eliza is they're trying to figure out what to do when your plan for your life doesn't happen, or everything just goes off track in that gray period. So, Grace was kind of extreme, where she was like, I'm not going to play anymore, but it was a part of her, and she was always doing something musical, whether it was conscious or not. And, it's just one of those things I think we all deal with. Not that I want to be an artist now, but, when I was younger, I thought I was going to do way more art than I wound up doing, but I still doodle to this day, and it's just part of who I am.
Yeah, because that was the thing, because she didn't play, but she had no problem with writing, so it was, she never gave it completely up, but she continued to compose, but it was almost like, I refuse to play, but I'm going to keep writing. I hear melodies, I hear sounds, which I thought was kind of cool, but but I was really rooting for her the entire time.
Well, we'll see if she figures it out.
Exactly, we'll see. Tell me, tell me the backstory of how did you come up with the name Sisters in Arms?
Sisters in Arms. We actually, this book has gone through several different names, and this one actually came fairly late, like very early this year, and it was on a list that I had come up with, just brainstorming, and it was one of the ones I was like, I'm not feeling it too much, but we'll put it on there. And then when we were having the meeting about, okay, we need to change the book for this third or fourth reason, it was like, okay, we're going to go with Sisters in Arms. Everybody really likes that, and I was like, it's good, but I'm not feeling it. And the reason why, I'm like one of those sticklers for historical accuracy and facts. And one of the facts was back in the 40s with the Women's Army Corps, the U.S. military brass decided it wasn't ladylike for these women to get weapons training or to learn how to fire a gun or things like that. So for me, I was like, Sisters in Arms doesn't work because they weren't armed, they weren't trained in it. But as we find out in the book, they were armed. Their weapons were not guns or torpedoes or grenades, but they developed their own weapons along the way. So then once I made that connection, I was like, oh wait, this title is perfect. So that's how that happened.
And I'm glad that you answered it that way, because I actually saw it different with Sisters in Arms, basically being, the ritual when you were in school and college, because you're an alumni of Spelman College. I'm an alumni from Morehouse, so we pretty much arm in arm all the time. So that was, there you go. Yep. So that's what I saw in my mind's eye, Sisters in Arms. But I hear what you say, and I like your definition even better, because it was the Army, but yet they quote unquote where were the arms,
Mm-hmm.
bearing arms?
Mm-hmm. They did not have weapons, but they were not defenseless.
What do you want readers to glean from this book?
I want them to get a sense of what it was like for our grandparents and now great grandparents when they were younger, the things that might have shaped who they are when we knew them later in life. In part, I mentioned Aunt Carmen before. Grace is basically my very creative imagining of her superhero origin, if you will. So I want to have an appreciation for that. I also want to put a record scratch in the narrative that everything back then was so horrible, and we were all downtrodden, we were all dirt poor and depressed, and always complaining about what the white man was doing to us. That, as you know now, we don't do that often.
Right.
We lived life. We had regular everyday problems that had nothing to do with that, and a lot of the things that we find that we're going through today, they may not talk about how they dealt with it, but I wanted to show the creative ways they were able to persevere and carry on and build that foundation for what would later become the civil rights movement in the 50s and in the 60s. I also wanted to talk about, yeah, so there's a lot more in there, but that would be the big picture thing just for us and for other people who are interested in this topic.
Yeah, very good. That's very true. What you just described is, you saw elements, tones of that throughout the book, especially the conflict between Grace and Mom, but what Mom did to sustain, what Dad did to sustain. He was a porter, and most blacks at that time were porters, which meant you spent a lot of time away from home, which was still considered a good job, making great money, but they still couldn't make ends meet based upon where they may have been living, be it New York or DC or wherever, that type of a thing. But I think that was a great, yeah.
Or if your father wasn't in the home all the time, he was still contributing and making a difference when and where he could.
Exactly. Let's take a step back, and I forgot to do this follow-up. You did mention that you kind of started this with the research from your aunt, and you did it for project, but then you also had an affinity for love of World War II. But at what point during this research 30 years ago that you finally started saying, hey, this actually could potentially be a good book?
Basically, once I saw the picture, I was like, oh, if they were in Europe, that means they had, there's this whole things that they went through. They had to have gone through boot camp. They had to have gone through crossing the ocean. They had to go through all these different things, or even just, going from being a civilian into military life, but very segregated, and now you are basically, these people control you who may not necessarily like you, or just you don't belong here. So there is so much to play with. Or even the whole thing of what happens when you have this plan, everything's going great, and then at the last minute you meet the perfect guy. If I met you yesterday, if I met you 2 weeks from now, or if I met you next year, everything would be fine. But because I met you on this day, the worst day to meet you, what happens? So it was just, there was just so much there. And as I read about what these, the real women actually went through and the things they did, like someone even got married over there. I don't know if it was, a long time childhood friend, or if it's, one of those wartime romances, but there was a whole bunch of really interesting things that happened back then. So I had to write about it.
Wow. So let me ask you that, since you've done so much, the delving into the World War II, how deep have you gotten into your own family history?
Well, as I think the furthest back I've gotten is a woman who was born into slavery in 1766. And I just need to find record of who her kids were, and then I can prove that I'm related to her. But that's as far back as I can go.
Yeah, that's good. I haven't made it back that far. That's very rare to find a Black person that can get all the way back to 1700s. Because
I was shocked.
Yeah, because that's at the beginning. That's wow.
Yep. So once I found that, I was like, I dare some, once I make that connection and prove she's blood, no one can ever tell me that I don't belong here again. Because my people have probably been here longer than theirs. Exactly.
So in the process of writing writing the book, what was one of those favorite moments, favorite things about writing Sisters in Arms?
Oh man, I really like the scene in the elevator fairly early on, or that moment when Grace is all like, I don't
Oh
belong
yeah,
here and I don't know, maybe I should leave. And it was the elevator operator, the old man that most people
yes,
probably would overlook. And he was, he gave her the little pep talk. And then even then she was still shaky. And then, somebody assumes that she works there and she's the help, and she fights back and she makes that decision. No, I'm going for it. I definitely belong here. That was a fun one to write. And then the scene, I'm not necessarily spoiling anything. If you do your research on the 688, then you would know about Charity Adams and her
oh
moment
yes,
where a general told her to basically stop the operations just for a frivolous reason. And she told him, over my dead body, sir, and got away with it. I think more people need to know about that.
yes, and to find out that whole scene was based upon some facts, that made it even more compelling.
Mm-hmm.
To read it was great for the novel, but then to find out you based it on some factual, like, okay, I'm proud of you, sister. Hey,
Oh, that was getting in there through hell or high
right.
water.
You were in the military, and at that time you was truly in a white man's military and a woman, and you told this man what you were not going to do.
You went against their mission.
Yes, that took balls, and I can't emphasize enough that part of the book, that to know that it was based on facts, that was probably one of the best moments, because I think that we as people, even today, we're afraid to even speak up. In any encounter that we have on our job or at school, we have to learn how to know when to pick our battles. But at the same time, you got to still know when it's time to stand up. Otherwise it's a continuum. 60 Minutes just had a report where they did just a couple of weeks ago about the overtones of racism still in the military. We got a black Secretary of Defense, and he actually said that he had to, when he became one of the generals, he had to get a white man to step up because they would not take his commands. That's actually sad. And I think that was within 2017, I believe he said that happened. So we're not talking 19 whatever, we're talking 20 in the 2000s.
And it's nothing new. Like I said, Black women in uniform, if they were in the South at the wrong time in the wrong place, were beaten up because somebody was offended by the fact that they expected a white person to obey their commands. Just the possibility or the thought of it. People wound up in the hospital. So.
Exactly. Yeah. Sad but true.
I'm not surprised.
You've already touched on a lot of it throughout our conversation, but what did you learn from writing this book? What couple of things that really stood out that you learned even more the more you wrote about it from your research?
Just how creative and feisty these women were, and they fought back, even if the bigger picture shows that, okay, we only made little footstep progress in that time period. They laid the groundwork, and they fought back. They might not have gone off on people all the time or did things, but it was just the little things and the creative things and the strategies. I wish I had known more about this when I first entered the workforce, and just the different things I experienced. I felt like I was swimming on my own, and like, is this racism? Or it isn't? Should I say something? And now I have this whole resource of from 75 years ago of how you are able to fight back, in when there were more restrictions placed on them than there were ever on me. So that was my biggest takeaway and gratefulness about this.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that. Now, as an author, as a Black author, how important is it for Black writers to have writing available for Blacks to read, how to be able to tell our own stories? How important is that?
It's very important because I would say in reading, there's more books coming out now, historical fiction written by Black authors and Black women. The nuance that we pick up on is there, where it's not so much in other books or books written by other people about us. Just the little moments, they may not know to have the chin up baby girl they may not know about a Black porter knows how navigate the system so that, okay, this is an awkward situation, but I'm going to alleviate the awkwardness and I'm also going to make it better. Or just those little things on how we interact with each other on a personal level and work around the system things. So I'm really excited about the books that are coming out, the stories that are coming out, stuff that, we probably like, how could that ever happen? Like with Island Queen by Vanessa Riley, the richest woman in the Caribbean
Yes.
during the Regency times was a Black woman. And she built it from scratch. She was a formerly enslaved person who built her wealth empire from scratch, owned land in the Caribbean. I had no idea until I saw that book.
Exactly. We actually just had a conversation with Vanessa in that book, and I was
cool.
really, I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but just from hearing the interview and how she drilled down and talked about things, how much empowerment that this sister had at this time. We're talking in the late 1700s, early 1800s. That, wow, how many more Blacks were really doing things at that time that kind of like the whole Hidden Figures. We didn't know about all the women who was behind Nassau. But then when you look at it now, it saddens me that here it is, 2021. How many Blacks are now still working in Nassau and are looking at the pilots, at all the pilots who were Tuskegee Airmen? How many Blacks are flying commercial or flying jets, for military? We should be dominating just by looking at the things that happened in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. But as the general just said the other day, as far as leadership for Blacks in the military and for pilots, it's only 2%. It was 2% when he went in, and it's 2% now. That means we're not growing.
And how much do we hear Black people don't do that? But actually we did. My favorite takeaway from Henry Louis Gates, the African Americans, and the very first one, he talked about Blacks down here where I am in South Georgia. They couldn't necessarily take the Underground Railroad, to freedom in Philadelphia and New York. They swam to freedom in Florida. And, talking about Black people don't swim. We swam for our freedom. And he made a point of saying that. And I was like, whoa.
Now I got my mind just went there, because everything along that coast, that's ocean.
Yep.
There are riptides, there are sharks, there's a lot of jellyfish. Like, what's worse, swimming with alligators or swimming with sharks or jellyfish? But to hear you say that and to realize that they swam, that's a couple of 100 miles.
Or sometimes, like where I am, I'm about 14 miles from Florida. You just swim across the river. It's still got a bunch of nasty stuff in it, but they swam for their freedom. And I imagine there's had to be people who swam across the Ohio River to freedom too. But Black people don't swim.
Right. We're afraid of water. What inspires you? What inspires you as a writer?
Oh God, just little, it's just little tidbits of things like what I'm working on now. You wouldn't think that there was a woman who's in the Baseball Hall of Fame, or that she was actually a woman of color, would you?
Oh no, I didn't.
Just that little tidbit was like, what? She was co-owner of one of the Negro League teams. Her role was basically what you would call a general manager today. And she was the first owner who was compensated for her players' contracts when Major League Baseball took their players into white baseball.
Wow, what was her name?
And Effa Manley.
Oh, that's cool.
This is the bobblehead for her. I'm using it as inspiration. But this was in the 30s and 40s. And before that, she's the one who spearheaded the campaign to integrate 125th Street in Harlem, where don't shop where you can't work. You could buy whatever you wanted on 125th Street, but you couldn't get a job. And she spearheaded the campaign so Black people could get jobs during the Depression.
Wow.
So that little nugget.
That's a little nugget that, yes, I can see that can mushroom into a great book, a great movie, another hidden figure that, we don't talk about, and I'm wondering, these guys who are baseball buffs, fanatics, who follow, Negro League, did you know that?
They do know about her, but in my research, everybody focuses on the baseball, but they're not focusing on, her civil
Ownership and
rights stuff.
management. Yeah.
Yeah. But even her civil rights work, um, in Harlem in the 30s, even before
Wow.
she got into the baseball upper office. Yeah. So it's been fun trying to piece together what her life was like before, but
Yeah.
it's gonna be a good
What
time.
did what did you major in college?
Sociology with the minor in writing.
You do no history.
No, I purposely did not major in history because at the time I loved it too much to have to, do that deep dive into it. I like being
Okay.
an armchair historian. Going back, I would be a history major. And I'd be running the museum in DC.
Right, because I hear the passion,
Mhm.
and for you to be able to find these little nuggets, how, so that my question would be, how do you start your research? Like, I mean, what draws you to something to make you decide to go look it up? Like you just mentioned a sister.
Mhm.
I mean, how did you even know to go there?
When I was when I first conceived of Sisters in Arms, I thought there's going to be a couple of different storylines where somebody was a Negro League player who went into the Army, but I dropped that. And so I was playing around with the idea of a Negro League story. So, I knew about the women who played in the 50s. So I was going to, I was digging deeper into them. I just put like women in the Negro Leagues. And,
Mm-hmm.
Tony Stone and everybody popped
Mm-hmm.
up. But then Effa Manley popped up and I was like, who is that? And then I found an article that said there were actually 4 women Negro League owners. And I was like, what? We had one in the
Wow.
20s. Yep, we had one in the 20s. We had 2 in the 40s and 1 in the 50s. And
And
so Effa was the one, her whole life from conception to death was soap opera. And so I was like, let me talk about Effa.
wow, and here we are, 2000. And how many sisters do we have that are part ownership of any MLB
Or general managers.
or a general manager?
Mm-hmm.
Here we go again. So you just
Mm-hmm.
named 6
Mm-hmm.
from 1920s to the 50s, but then we all of a sudden disappear out of the whole game. You know,
Mm-hmm. And that was Effa's point where she was saying we need to get the Negro Leagues in order because yes, we want integration, but we need to be in a position where we can be incorporated into the minor league system. Otherwise, all these jobs that Black people have are going to go just like that. And they
and
did.
they did. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that typically what's happened. That happens every time when you stop and think about desegregation. Same thing happened.
Mm-hmm.
So those who may have been a principal here in a Black school, he now loses that tenure. Either he becomes a teacher or nothing at all through
Mm-hmm.
integration, because
Mm-hmm.
now we just got rid of the 4 Black high schools that was in the city.
Mm-hmm. Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C. The unfortunate thing about segregation was that all these Black PhDs couldn't get a job, but
Yep.
because of segregation, they were able to get jobs as high school teachers. So now we have high school students getting master's level and PhD level education in high school and moving on. And
Yeah.
then with integration, that stopped.
Well, yeah, it did. But then at the same time, which my mother was a teacher, and one
Mm-hmm.
of the things that I noticed growing up, when she at the time she was teaching right at the transition of segregation,
Mm-hmm.
desegregation, but Black teachers had a tendency to really take time with that student who was kind of
Mm-hmm.
lagging behind.
Mm-hmm.
Versus when you had, when we started desegregating, either you keep up or we're going to put you in out, which I don't believe that every child has been labeled as being a slow learner or a remedial learner is necessarily remedial. It just means that a teacher just doesn't have the time
Mm-hmm.
to spend the help, whereas that Black teacher did.
Mm-hmm. And then even now you have the HBCU, the historically Black colleges and universities, not necessarily the big name ones, but some of the smaller ones that you don't hear about as much. They're actually known for taking that struggling student and, polishing that diamond in the rough. And by the time they get out, they're up to speed and, getting professional jobs or having the life that everyone said they would never have because they were too slow. So
Sure.
you still have that gift, but
you
it's
do.
not as much.
Heck,
Mm-hmm.
heck, Morehouse had a whole remedial program. Shoot,
They have that new one Anybody who's just shy of finishing their degree, come on to Morehouse, and we'll make that happen.
Exactly. So, but you're right though. I mean, point well taken. That is exactly, versus if you made it to any white institution, I got the letter. I'm sorry, you're not qualified to come here. You need to go to junior college.
Mm-hmm.
You don't cut the mustard. But I mean, not a one black school turned me down.
Mm-hmm.
But every white institution told me that I wasn't capable.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
or even there's a Facebook group that I'm in of HBCU alumni, and someone even posted 3 weeks ago, hey, I have this kid, he has a 2.6 average, and if I don't get him into college somewhere, he's going to fall through the cracks, and he's going to lose his way. And that was like a Thursday, and by Monday he was enrolled in college, full ride with a computer. He just had to get there.
Wow, full ride.
Yep.
That's awesome. That's a great story.
Yep.
That is a great story.
Mm-hmm.
So what authors have piqued your interest? Who have been some of your mentors that keep you on this writing journey?
In terms of the one who is always tapping my shoulder and has words of encouragement, Beverly Jenkins, who writes African-American historical romance. I stand on her shoulders. I tell her that basically every time I talk to her. If not for her, I would never think that anyone would ever have interest in something of that I'm doing now. Also, who else? Marita Golden. When in the process of writing this book, when I got lost in the weeds, I sent her an email, help, and she came and saved me. and this book would not have happened without her. Who else? Tina Mckenza Elroy. She actually is near me. She always has an encouraging word. She's the one, that when most writers are like, I'm not a writer. And the first time I met her, she looked at me, she's like, you're a writer, aren't you? And I was like, you know what? I am. Yeah, that was my moment of, claiming who I am. So she just looked at you and said it and asked, were you a writer? Yeah, she just looked at me and she said, you're a writer. And I was like, I was about to say no. And I was like, you know what? You're right. I am a writer.
You received it. You received it.
Mm-hmm. I was just like, the ancestors talked through her, and I'm like, who am I to negate that at that point?
How deep is your faith? What do you lean on? Your faith or your own gut intuition in anything you do pertaining to writing?
Aren't they the same? One and the same? Well, for me, it's
I take that answer, but a lot of people don't. But yeah, okay, I'll take that.
Mm-hmm. Because sometimes that gut instinct is the voice that comes in, and you're like, all right, you can't, who am I to even say anything against it, and just go with it.
Cool. Before we close out, a couple of fun things. A couple of fun questions. Favorite guilty pleasure?
Ooh, favorite guilty pleasure. I bake and then I eat it. Right now, I would say, yeah, baking pies. Yeah.
Oh, yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay. What's your favorite pie to bake?
Sweet potato pie, which is the first one I ever learned. So I'll stick with that one.
Interesting. All right. Favorite non-work hobby?
Ooh. I don't know if you would consider it a hobby, but right now I'm learning American Sign Language, and I practice by teaching my daughter. So that's been really fun, and learning more about deaf culture.
So are you at what level? Are you just going through the ABCs, or are you really into the?
I'm at a point. I'm finishing up level 2 of a four-part course right now. So I'm at a point now where I can do simple sentences, and it's more remembering. I know the sign, but remembering it so I can do it. But I'm hoping I get to a point where if I'm speaking publicly, I can sign for myself, and I don't have to worry about if there's an interpreter or not.
That's cool. Yeah, I started. A friend of mine, his grandmother was blind and deaf, and to this day I can't even fathom that, to have 2 daughters to be blind and deaf. And she raised both of them, and both of them became school teachers and principals. So I kind of learned sign language, the basics. I guess that would be level to just knowing the alphabets and, just spelling words. But
Mm-hmm.
he was able to communicate. Of course, they had to feel because she couldn't see, but that's how they communicated to one another.
Mm-hmm. We'll make a way.
Yeah. So what is next for you?
Next, in terms of books, is the Negro League book about Effa Manley. That one is also going to be a novel. So it'll be my interpretation of how she was and what her life was like. I have a project that hasn't been announced yet. It's not contracted, that I'm working on, set in the 1950s. And then after that, I want to jump into 1920s Paris.
I can't wait. I can't wait. That's three.
Mm-hmm.
Those are three great books that I see on the horizon.
Mm-hmm. And as soon as I can go to Paris.
Yeah, for research.
Yes.
Just like Grace wanted, her dream was to go to Paris.
Mm-hmm.
Just to be able to play. But yeah, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to thank you very much for joining me on Meet the Author, Rolling Out's Meet the Author. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been talking with author Kaia Alderson and her book, Sisters in Arms. Great novel. It is a historical novel of Black women who actually served in the military, the Air Force during World War II. This book is available right now at blackbookstore.com. You can pick it up. It is a great read. Be on the lookout. There'll be opportunity also for a couple of promotionals that's going to happen too. But make sure if you got the can't help it disease, go ahead and buy the book now. And before we close out, please share with us, Kaia, your social media handles and any special websites where they could get in contact and keep in touch with you.
Sure. My website is www.kaiaalderson.com. It's my first and last name, all one word. My Instagram and my Twitter are @Kaia Writes, KaiaWrites. And then on Facebook, I am Kaia Alderson Author.
Awesome. Thank you very much. We appreciate you. Continue to be creative. Continue to write. Allow your mind to go deep and wide and continue writing great novels. I cannot wait to see the new projects that's coming out. But once again, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you pick up this right here, Sisters in Arms, now available at blackbookstore.com.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Make it a great day and we will be in touch.
Definitely.